So I believe we're live now. First of all, I want to welcome everyone to this Baker Institute webinar, Prospects for Mining and Minerals Processing in the United States, which is a very big question. I want to state at the outset that we have been heading towards this question for several months now. The Energy, Minerals, and Materials program within the Center for Energy Studies, which I, Michelle Foss, am the fellow of, we have been unpacking various aspects of the demand for materials for a range of energy and industrial applications for economic development and growth in general. And some of you in the audience today, I know, are familiar with that work and have seen some of the products, participated in other webinars and roundtables. And this one, the third in the series, the goal was to try to direct questions about the availability of key non-fuel elements for materials that we need for a variety of different applications within the domain of the United States. We had an earlier roundtable for our Center for Energy Studies, Energy Forum members and guests. During that discussion, I would have to say that the general consensus was that while people are beginning to realize the scale and the scope of the effort to make sure that we've got robust supply chains to support alternative energy applications, whether wind, solar, and the related components, the vast effort around electric vehicles and electrification in general. There are any number of challenges. We discussed during the roundtable challenges in permitting and licensing new mining operations in the United States. We have particular challenges on minerals processing that we're going to focus on in this webinar. I think that it's safe to conclude that people are hopeful because of a variety of different things going on in the US Congress, in the new administration, across the executive branch, some of the initiatives from the previous administration and a variety of other things, that there is a better understanding, at least, inside our institutional framework of what we need to be thinking about. What, of course, we're trying to do is set our priorities around elements and minerals that we are import dependent on, or that have particular strategic and commercial challenges associated with them, and we'll bring those up during the session today. This is a very big challenge, and I think that it's one that certainly we can be very constructive around. And to that end, I'm introducing a very good colleague of ours, Michael Moats at Missouri Science and Technology. Mike and the group at MST, we have done several things with us now. I think we have reached a very good common platform in terms of our understanding of the challenges and the issues. Mike has been tremendously helpful on details that we're going to share with you this morning. And I also believe that we are very united in our concerns about what we need people to be thinking about and realistic about in terms of minerals production in the United States, minerals processing in the United States, and beyond the scope of our borders, what we face on the international side of things. So I hope that kind of is a very decent, quick summary of where we've been, both over the past couple of years in all of our interactions, but also just in the past hour or so of discussion this morning. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mike to introduce himself and introduce MST to our Baker Institute audiences. And then we're going to talk about the complexities of attaining key elements in very realistic ways. And to do that, Mike is going to share his screen, open up a slide deck that is a very good slide deck, and hopefully provide many of you in the audience with a better understanding of where stuff comes from that we will need for various applications and what we need to be thinking about. Mike?
Great, thank you, Michelle. So it's an honor and a privilege. I appreciate the Baker Institute inviting me to join in this webinar. And I just want to talk a little bit about supply chains of certain critical minerals. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an extractive metallurgist at Missouri University of Science and Technology in Rolla, Missouri. We used to be Missouri School of Mines, and so we're a very traditional mines and metallurgy engineering program. We're actually, while you may not be familiar with us, we actually produce a lot of engineers here. We're one of the top 20 largest engineering producing universities in the United States. We collectively have expertise across the entire supply chain. And so we have economic geologists, we have mining engineers, we have metallurgical engineers, we have engineering management, we have business, we have economics, we have policy people. And so collectively, there's a lot of us who are coming together and have formed what we call the Thomas J. O'Keefe Institute, named after one of our favorite professors here at S&T. And we're looking at trying to join the conversation and shape the technology and the policy directions to help us remove things from the critical mineral list. And so if you've never seen the critical mineral list, the USGS published this in 2017. It was collected off of their own analysis of what elements were important for our defense and the national economy. They collected information from all the other branches of the government and came up with this list. And so on this periodic table, what you'll see is the critical mineral list is heavily really an element list. There are some minerals listed, but generally speaking, it's what elements are we critical, are we at risk on? And I've also listed some gray elements there, which are, we'll say, I should have also probably done iron, elements that are important because quite a few of our critical minerals come out as byproducts from these. And really the critical mineral list, I think, has really taken off as we look and we stand at this precipice, or maybe we've already started this green energy transition, clean energy transition. How are we going to decarbonize our energy sources because of climate change and global warming concerns? And so if we're going to mitigate the projections of temperature increases across the world, then we need to stop emitting CO2. And if we're going to stop emitting CO2, then we need to do renewable energy sources. So solar and wind are the flavors of most promise. And if you look at the elements that we need there, you see that we need these minor elements, these small commodity elements, small tonnage elements that have big impact on these technologies. Not to say that the big elements don't matter. There's a lot of iron and steel that goes into a windmill, and there's a lot of aluminum that goes into a solar panel. So there's going to be a lot of just generic need for more metals. And in fact, as an extractive metallurgist, the decarbonization of energy means that what I do is really important and will be really important for years and years to come, because what we really say is we're trading carbon for metal, and we're going to use those metal to generate electricity and to store electricity. I'm going to focus on a few elements. Obviously, to try to talk about all these elements in green would take months and months. But I'm just going to focus on a few of these that have been highlighted by Rod Eckert, who's at Colorado School of Mines. He's the associate director of the Critical Materials Institute. And so he's identified these elements as being the impact of a supply disruption would have a significant impact. And it appears that the likelihood of an impact is a supply disruption is also significant. So these are kind of high risk, high value type elements. And so I'm going to focus on the rare earths. So those are the ones down in the lanthanides down here, which are used heavily in magnets, which are very important to use in defense applications and wind turbines. We're going to focus on cobalt, which is really important for lithium-ion batteries for energy storage. We're going to focus on indium, which is really important because we all love touch screens. And if we have a touch screen, then we have an indium tin oxide on our glass. And if you don't have enough indium, you don't produce indium tin oxides. And then gallium, which is this really small element, worldwide production of gallium metal is only like 400 tons. But gallium arsenide is critical for our ability to do radio transmission. So if you like Bluetooth, you use gallium arsenide. And so gallium is really important as well. So we're going to focus on those four. What's important when we look at supply chains, oftentimes when we talk about critical minerals, we talk about the fact that we need more mining in the US. And yes, we need more mining in the US, but we have to understand that just to mine something that contains a critical mineral does not mean that you're supplying it to the final product that we want to impact. So rare earths, the United States is blessed with many rare earth deposits, and you can target rare earths. And in fact, it's probably a good one to target by the federal government, because you mine a rare earth deposit, you do mineral processing for rare earths, you convert the rare earth concentrate into rare earth metals, and then you make magnets. It's a pretty straightforward supply chain. There's not a lot of arms going off. But if you start to look at some of these minor elements that are produced as a byproduct, you don't typically go mine for cobalt. There are a few primary cobalt mines in the world, but predominantly you go mine nickel and copper, and cobalt comes along. So if you want to increase your cobalt production, not only do you have to mine for nickel and for copper, but then you have to recover the cobalt from those entities. So if you don't recover the cobalt that's in nickel concentrate, you're not really producing cobalt. You're just producing concentrates. Same with indium. Indium primarily comes out of zinc production, not zinc mining. So if you mine zinc, great. But if you produce concentrate and ship it overseas, then you're not actually going to capture the indium that comes out during the processing of the zinc concentrate. Same with gallium. Gallium is a byproduct from alumina production. We dig up bauxite, we ship bauxite, and we make alumina, and then we make alumina into aluminum, right? So we have quite a few aluminum smelters in the United States still, not as many as we used to, but we don't capture gallium during aluminum production, we capture them during alumina. And so the point of this is, if you don't have zinc production and you don't have alumina production, you're not going to capture indium, you're not going to capture gallium. And so who controls these things will control the ability to supply these elements. And so if we look at domesticating the supply chain for these critical minerals, it's not just good enough to say, I'm going to produce mines. You have to produce each of the steps along the way if you really want to de-risk your supply chains. So I went through my database, which is just collectively what's in my head. And I said, okay, so I start with a deposit. I go to a mine, I make a concentrate, we process that, we refine it into some feedstock, which we eventually make into the final product that we want for our green energy. And I just put together this simple table to give you a snapshot right now, as according to my knowledge that I'm aware of, how we're doing on this in the United States. And so when you look at rare earths, yeah, we have several rare earth deposits. We know where several places we can go get rare earths. The thing is, really, we have one active mine, it processes the concentrate, and we ship the concentrate overseas, probably to China. And so we don't have the ability to refine it to metal, nor do we really have the capability to convert that metal into magnets. When it comes to cobalt, we have multiple metal deposits where we know what cobalt is. In fact, Missouri, where I live, is blessed with some cobalt reserves, and we're working with local mining companies to try to recover those. But really, there's only one mine. It's a small nickel cobalt mine up in Michigan. They make a concentrate, they ship the concentrate to Canada. So we have no refining, no ability to produce chemicals. Maybe we'll get some of those soon. But if you're going to start doing cobalt, then yeah, that's an issue. You've got to be able to have a nickel smelter or something like that. Same with indium. We have one zinc smelter, primary zinc smelter left in the United States. We used to have, when I started my career, there were 3 or 4 or 5. Now we have 1. And so unless you're bringing concentrates from around the world that contains indium into a zinc smelter in the United States and capture the indium, you're not making indium. But then we need to turn the indium into indium tin oxide. And do we do that in the United States? And the answer for the most part is no. Same with gallium. We have 1 alumina production facility. We used to have multiples. Now we have 1. And so the only place that you're going to get is by bringing in bauxite that has the gallium and recovering it at the alumina production facility. And so the point of this is there's significant supply gaps in the supply chain for these elements, which is of course why they're on the critical mineral list. But to just say that we're going to increase our mining production doesn't capture the whole value of this. So how are we going to move forward? If I was king, if I could make executive orders and make Congress do what I wanted to do, I don't really want that authority or power. But one is the United States is, the USGS has done an okay job, but could do much better. We know there are unidentified deposits in the US. We need to do a better job. We need to fund the research to identify where we can go dig them up. But then we have to understand that mine permitting in the United States is terrible. I mean, you're looking at decades potentially to get through the mining process. So even if you identify the deposit, you're not going to concentrate for another decade or two. And we need to start making changes, right? If we're going to, the people are saying we're going to change, GM is going to electrify their vehicle fleet in 15 years. Where are all the nickel and cobalt going to come from for the batteries? Where's all the infrastructure? Where's all the metals going to come from? So not only do we have to build to streamline the mining process, the mine permitting process in my mind, but we need to do innovation in it, and we need to invest in our processing infrastructure. We've pretty much exported all of our smelters. There are no primary lead smelters. There are 3 copper smelters and 1 is shut down. There's 1 zinc smelter. There's 1 aluminum refinery. And if you're going to capture these minor elements, the people who have these smelters, in the last 20 years, China's produced, has started 30 to 40 new copper smelters, and we have 2. So if you want a minor element coming out of a copper supply chain, you're going to go to China. I think the federal government can help, right? The green energy, I'm encouraged by the fact that Elon Musk has said, you need to mine, please mine more nickel, do it right and correct. And we need more people in the green energy business to realize that the people who are going to make these batteries, the wind turbines, the solar panels, the First Solars of the world, the BMWs of the world, the General Motors of the world, we need these companies to start understanding that to help with the mining and processing. Right now, one of the big things that companies are doing, especially in the gold and silver space, is they're facilitating offtake agreements. I'm going to pay you up front for the metal you're going to produce, and therefore you can build your mine, build your plant, and here's the capital to do that. And I think that those agreements should be facilitated, maybe even subsidized by the federal government. And then, of course, we are hollowed out as a country in the ability to have engineers who understand the mining and metallurgical processing. There are 13 ABET accredited mining schools left. There are only 7 metallurgical engineering programs that are ABET accredited in the United States. Now, that's not to say you can't retrain civil engineers, chemical engineers, and the like, but someone's got to do it, and it costs money, it costs time. So I think we need to do a better job at preparing our workforce to sustainably and cleanly produce the materials that we need for the green energy transition. If you want green energy transition, and that seems what the American population wants, great. But we need to be able to produce that domestically for security reasons, but also because we can control the environmental input or environmental footprint better than if we send these to faraway places where we don't know what's going to happen. We're not going to allow for child labor in the United States. We're not going to allow for dumping of pollution in the United States. And so I think it's better to do it onshore where we have better control than to ship it around the world. So Michelle, I kind of lost track. I hope I didn't go too long.
No, that was excellent. Let me just tell the audience, first of all, please use Q&A for your questions. There are some already, so Mike, you might want to take a look at those. There are some to react to. I want to let everybody know that on the Baker Institute website is a series of briefs that were prepared for the G20 this year, and it includes one that I co-authored with Mike and another of our colleagues at MST, Kwame Awuah-Afai. And that takes these recommendations and puts them. Oh, Mike, don't take away your screen. We need the slide. These recommendations with ones that we think all of the G20 member countries should consider adopting. And so I want to encourage everyone to download and take a look at that G20 brief on mining and materials for energy transition, especially related purposes. And I also want to mention, while you're forming your questions, that I have a separate policy brief that is part of the Baker Institute set of briefs, recommendations to the new administration on a variety of different things, but I posted one that is an extension of our G20 brief that focuses specifically on the importance of putting materials earlier in the conversation rather than later, and letting materials drive some of our needs or some of our thinking about how to build robust supply chains. So, Mike, if you've had a chance to look at a couple of these questions and see whether these are things that you can react to. I do want to, though, before you do that, here's an idea. I want to go back to something that you and I have talked about before that I think is a good illustration for the audience. To this point about what's a critical mineral, everyone, the USGS annual mineral commodities summary for 2021 was released yesterday. You can go to the USGS website, to the National Minerals Information Center, and download that. And you can see for yourself what our import dependencies are across all of the commodities that the USGS tracks, all the mineral commodities that they track. Mike, when you and I started our conversation a few years ago, one of the really great examples was tellurium from copper. And this makes 2 points. We are import dependent on roughly 40% of our copper supply comes from outside of the United States. And that's likely to grow unless we take actions. Copper is not one that's usually on critical minerals lists, because the general view is that the world is fairly good in terms of copper suppliers, especially friendly suppliers who are willing to engage in trade, and Chile being one of the key countries for that, along with others. The tellurium example was great because when you brought that up, one of the things we talked about was the incremental investment that you would have to make in copper refining to capture tellurium. About $1 billion, I think, is what we talked about to increase tonnage of tellurium. I don't remember whether we had a tonnage target as part of that, but you can refresh. But there are no tellurium prices. Tellurium is not a traded commodity. So trying to figure out what the return on investment would be for that is very difficult. To the points that you've made this morning, from a mining company point of view, do you spend the money to try to increase production of tellurium because we need it, but you don't have anything that will help you figure out what the economics of that venture would be? Or do you try to produce more of things that are traded and do have value, like silver, gold? So can you elaborate on that a bit? And
yeah,
that's a good example for some of the other things that you highlighted this morning.
Yeah, so I'm blessed to be part of a group of people who survey copper refineries from around the world. We do it every 3 years. And so we've collected over the years quite an impressive array of data about what actually goes into, we'll say, Western non-Chinese refineries. And from that, you get an understanding of how much of these minor elements are captured during copper mining and processing and smelting and end up at a refinery. And actually, we're working on a project right now with the USGS and some of the colleagues there to look at really trying to understand what the potential tellurium production could be if all the tellurium was captured from copper refineries. And the number is going to become somewhere between 1,800 and 2,200 tons, I think, per year of tellurium enters copper refineries around the world. The total tellurium market is probably 400 to 600 tons. It's non-transparent, so we don't know exactly what that number is. So the point here is, if you were to you don't have to do any extra mining. All you have to do is capture the tellurium that comes into copper refineries, and we can increase the tellurium production by a factor of 2 or 3, or even 4. Of course, most of the copper smelting in the world is now done in China, so it'll be captured in China. But we could do a better job in Europe and in the United States. So then the question is, well, why don't we? Why don't we capture more tellurium? And if you look at the byproduct value and the value of the copper, it helps us understand the mindset. You know, you say, okay, well, we need tellurium because cadmium telluride is really great solar collectors, thin films, they're great solar panel, they're going to be needed for the solar panel future. Well, okay, but I run a copper refinery and I'm going to produce a couple $1 billion a year of copper at the refinery. And I'm going to produce hundreds of $1 million worth of gold, and I'm going to produce tens of millions of dollars worth of silver. And I'm going to produce maybe $500,000 worth of tellurium. Why do I care about tellurium? I just don't even want to focus on it. And so actually tellurium is mainly produced in copper refining because it's an impurity that we have to get rid of. If we process it in certain ways, it gets into solution and will mess up my copper production. So I don't want to endanger my $2 billion worth of production. So I got to capture this tellurium. And so don't think of recovery of tellurium as recovery for economic value. Think of it as a disposable method. I'm disposing of tellurium by selling it. And really, so now it becomes an issue of, well, even if the price goes up by, okay, maybe if the price goes up by a factor of 10, now I'm willing to invest. But otherwise, you're just saying I'm investing to get rid of an impurity. And if I can get rid of it by sending it back into a pile of rock and making it disappear, I'll do that, which might be done at a few mine sites, maybe not in the United States. So the question becomes, why bother? And so this is where I say the facilitating of the takeoff. If you start facilitating and say, okay, solar panel producers, you want tellurium, or maybe I want tellurium because MERCAD tellurides are really great night vision goggles. That's the material that gives our military an advantage and does all those cool green screen stuff that we see on TV when commando teams raid places, right? So we need to have these facility takeoffs where people say, I'm going to pay you in front for the tellurium you're going to produce so you can build the facility to capture it. And so now if you take the capital out of it, now the economics change, and maybe the copper company says, okay, for national defense and social goodwill and all that other stuff, I'll capture the tellurium that I'm not currently capturing. So I think there's other ways to think about this than just saying I need a plant. Some of it just is we need to foster the conversation, but ultimately in the free markets, or at least mostly free markets, we need an economic return. Okay, so there's a couple questions on rare earths. I will say that I am not a rare earth expert. I will tell you what I know. There are multiple rare earth deposits in the United States. The ones that we try to avoid are the ones when we crack the mineral, which means that we leach the mineral, we release thorium into the water because thorium is radioactive and it becomes a nuisance. Because of that, the Blanding Mill, which is, I can't remember, keeps changing companies, but the Blanding Mill is your uranium mill in southeastern Utah. They've made the news here recently because they're going to agree to ship monzonite from Florida, I think it is, or maybe South Carolina, out to Utah because they're a uranium mill. They're already regulated to handle radioactive materials. So they have all the processing facilities essentially they need to crack the minerals. They do solvent extraction already on site. And so they have the ability to make rare earth concentrates. And so I think that's a clever thing, but talk about logistics. I got to ship ore from, it's mineral sands. I guess they've already done processing. I'm going to ship mineral sands across the United States, but okay, maybe that's economical. We still make mineral concentrates. And so I'm encouraged to see they keep, I've heard several news stories. I don't know if it's actually going to happen, but I guess we're going to build a Texas plant for rare earths. It was funded by, or at least supported by the US government, which is what's going to be needed. And so great, we're producing rare earths there. And so I'm encouraged by what we see the US government doing, and hopefully the new administration will continue that to support the mining, the processing, and ultimate production of rare earths. And I think that's great. Rare earths, in my mind, is the easy one to fix because it's its own supply chain. When we start getting off of branches off of these existing, off of other supply chains, it gets much more complicated. So I think
let me just interject, Mike, though, on that
Sure.
one, because there is a case to be made for capturing the thorium in the same way that we would think about other things.
Yep.
Only in this case, we wouldn't simply dispose of it. We would use it for nuclear energy production. There are thorium molten salt reactor designs. I would tell the audience, I've been dipping into that a bit. That is a fascinating area because of the convergence between things that people could do or consider doing that would solve multiple problems. Availability of rare earths for applications that we need them, and new technologies for nuclear energy production. So, that's just one of those very interesting cases for closer examination.
I see a question about a hypothetical break in the supply chain and how that might affect U.S. energy security. I mean, the short answer is we are all dependent now on rare earth magnets coming out of other places. And rare earth magnets are the premier magnet choice for both motor actuators and also so for military applications plus automotive applications and ultimately for the wind turbines. I mean, you can always do substitution, but they're not as good. And I know that the Critical Materials Institute is looking heavily at that. But all of a sudden, you can't get the magnets you need to build your wind turbines. So you're going to slow this down, or you're not going to have the materials you need. You don't have all the silver you need for the connectors and the solar panels. It's the ability to control that. And of course, I guess that means that, from an energy security, you've already made the transition away from carbon. So you've started to wind those assets down. You've gone to, now I'm going to create wind turbines and solar panels, and I need to replace those eventually. And ultimately I can't do that. So then I start having rolling blackouts because I don't have enough energy, because I don't have the ability to generate the clean energy, because I've gotten rid of all my carbon assets, or I've reduced my carbon assets too much. I guess that's how I would say it. On the next question on
Wait, hold on, before you leave that.
Sure.
Can you on that and just comment, let's talk more generally about substitution and recycling if we can. There are several questions related to that. And I want to put that up front because for a lot of people, this seems like the easy solution. So we just move away from the minerals that we consider critical and find something else. We can solve the problem of raw materials inputs by recycling. And so thoughts on those before we depart?
Yeah, I mean, the reason they're on the critical mineral list is because the experts have decided that substitution is going to be really, really, really hard. That you're going to have to downgrade your capacities, or it's just not feasible. Regarding recycling, the world is constantly growing in population. We're always going to need more materials. And remember that the products that we're recycling now, we don't have a lot of experience or plants that deal with recycling, because typically recycling generates as much waste as it does good. And so we've gotten rid of most of our secondary smelters and refineries in the US. And so the things we're recycling don't have these critical minerals in the concentrations we need, and B, we don't have the plants to do it. So, and then it's still the design of our things are designed for the functionality, not for end recycling. And so how much energy and how much effort is it going to take to recycle? And are you really going to recover everything from these things? That's a work in progress. Even lithium ion batteries. I mean, right now the lithium just goes to the slag, and really what you're recycling is the nickel and the cobalt.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, so now moving to your questions you were going to focus on.
I think the next question was about, investing in a Western hemisphere.
Yeah.
To me, this is the question about who's friendly and who's not. And that gets into the policy space of, how much risk are we willing to take as a country to rely on our allies? And that's a very deep policy question. And so, I don't know the answer to that. As I'm a metallurgist. Jim. I don't know these things about policy, but it becomes a question of risk tolerance as a company or as a country. And let's be clear, we are dependent on a lot of people right now for what we need. I mean, that's happening right now. So the question is, can you form a consortium? And we, the State Department has started down this road with the ERGI initiative, I can never remember what ERGI stands for, but
Energy Resource Governance Initiative.
yeah, working with other countries to make sure that we're mining in a collective way. Can we extend that into processing? In my opinion, I think that would be a good way to look at it is, Australia, Japan, Canada, Chile, Peru, friends, long-term friends, Europe. What can we all process? What can we process? Who has advantages and take advantage of that to make sure that these things come? But so I think that's a policy, and it's a good policy question.
And let me just let the audience know, last year we did one of our minerals and materials roundtables with Frank Fannin, who just stepped down as Assistant Secretary of State in charge of the Energy Bureau, where a lot of these arrangements have been getting negotiated and where the ERGI program resides. And very much of that is toward building partnerships, not just practices, but also trading relationships, strengthening ties, looking at procurement. Part of what state was doing with Department of Defense were some of the procurement initiatives that rolled out in the previous administration, and that hopefully will continue forward. But those are those are steps that have to happen with full recognition that every sovereign resource owner has its own interests. You hope that everyone is united. I have to say that for people like me, all of that is hugely deja vu with the early days of OPEC arriving on the scene, looking at how oil markets were organized, what the role of the IEA, the International Energy Agency, was going to be, how countries were going to partner and collaborate. The United States was and may well be again a large importer of oil, and that concerned a lot of other trading partners, a lot of other consuming countries, and we are a large importer not only of minerals but also of final products. So that question is a huge one. Collaboration, how to collaborate across countries. In a large part that underlies our desire to push minerals up the food chain for the G20, because if countries aren't even recognizing these needs, then they won't engage on the fundamental question. All right, others in the mix, Mike.
Okay, so there's a question about rare earths from coal. Do I believe this will be a viable source? No. I think, if you're going to ask my honest opinion, I think that was done for political reasons to get votes out of Appalachia. And I just don't see it. It could happen. I could be very wrong. I hope I am. But that's my short answer. I know that DOE and NETL are still working on that, and maybe they will find cheaper ways to do that. And maybe rare earth extraction from coal waste, as we have to neutralize acid rock drainage coming off of these places, maybe. Smelting sources, what energy sources? It depends on the smelter. Usually smelters generate their own energy from sulfur oxidation from the sulfide minerals. And therefore we capture sulfuric acid, which gets consumed and used a lot. That's mostly how we make our phosphate fertilizers, which runs into our agriculture. So sulfuric acid is actually a great thing. It's also used heavily to convert corn into ethanol for our gas additives. So mostly that's there is energy inputs, and then they would be electricity and wherever the electricity comes from. Could we offshore minerals in the U.S.? Aaron, I don't know enough to know how to answer your question. So I'm not even going to try about offshoring in the exclusive zone. I don't know. Let's see. Garland, thanks for your comments. I've seen your comments about the cobalt mine starting up in Idaho. Again, that to me is that concentrate is probably going to end up in Canada. And as long as we're on good terms with Canada, Canada has a long history of nickel and cobalt production. And so maybe it's good enough that we're getting nickel sulfate and cobalt sulfate from Canada, as long as we're always on good terms with them. And maybe we don't need a nickel smelter and a cobalt refinery in the United States. Maybe we can live with what the Canadians have. Your other comment about getting a little dirty to be green or something like that. To me, it's this, to me, it's almost like, clean energy's dirty little secret, right? The dirty little secret of clean energy is we got to do mining, and we got to do all the things that we don't want done in our backyard because we perceive it to be dirty and nasty and ripping up the environment. And let's face it, mining is ripping up the environment. I don't care how you want to say it. I do this for a job, and I'm very passionate about it. We are purposefully reversing what Mother Nature and the good earth wants to do, which is to have these things as mineral forms. And we want to re-engineer it into a useful product for our society and for civilization. And in doing that, you're going to need energy and you're going to produce waste. And we have to do that as best we can. And again, I'd rather do that in the United States than anywhere else, because I think that our collective will to do that in the best way will be done. So Garland, thanks for your comments, and I agree. I think we need to yell louder about those things.
Mike, let me interject and just say there are several questions that are sort of along those lines, and related to the comment you opened with, replacing carbon with metals. One of the things that we've been advocating now consistently, from the Baker Institute, from the Center for Energy Studies, and Mike is on board with this. We all know this. We have to look at things on a life cycle basis. It makes no sense to displace, for instance, tailpipe carbon from combustion engine vehicles with carbon emissions in places where minerals are produced and or processed and batteries are manufactured, which is a very energy intense, emissions intense exercise, if you're actually either replacing or exceeding the tailpipe emissions. So that makes no sense at all. I've done some back of the envelope math on that. And the problem is the primary energy source that drives the supply chains that we need for clean energy. So we have to think about it that way. I mean, it's not just the problem of extractive businesses, it's across the supply chains that would be critical to the new energy applications that people are trying to scale up, right?
Yeah, and I don't want to say that, look, there's a lot going on, right? And I don't know everything that's going on, and neither does Michelle, and neither does any one individual here. There's so much movement in this space. So ARPA-E is right now out for request for information, because they're looking at the iron and steel supply chain, because the iron and steel industry worldwide produces 6 to 7% of the world's greenhouse gases. So the question is, and uses 4 to 5% of the electrical energy or something like that in the United States. It's huge. So, and it's not just the blast furnace or making of the steel, it's the rolling of the steel and so forth. And they have a very nice YouTube video on it. You can go see what they're thinking about. And they're looking for innovations for these things. And there's a lot of innovation that's going to go on here in these spaces to reduce our carbon footprint and to reduce our energy inputs or change our energy inputs. And I don't think any of us know where this is going to end up. The question is, do we have the will to do it? And just because we're spending money at a research level, we spend a lot of money on research. The question is, does anything come out the back end? And so, but you got to start somewhere. And I think there's been a couple comments about how long does it take the permit versus how long does it take the energy, transition. I see Steve James, thanks for joining us, Steve, and your comment. You wanted me to comment about the time to evaluate, engineer, and commission a critical mineral facility or circuit and the uncertainty of government over that time. And I mean, that's the key, right? These things, mines and plants, take a long time to figure out. It takes years and years and years to develop. And okay, so I'm going to make this investment And 8 years from now, guess what? The element's no longer on the critical mineral list because transition has occurred and I don't need that element anymore. I need a different element. And I think to me, that's the biggest concern that all of us have in the investment community. I'm not in the investment community, but I would see this as a problem. And this comes back to, facilitating the offtake agreements between processing companies and green energy companies. Okay, green energy, you really need to know steel. And wouldn't you want to be able to say that the steel that went into my wind farm is green steel, whatever that means, right? And maybe we start to have, instead of buying steel as a commodity, we now have different grades of commodities of various things with different carbon footprints. So you can say that we've done this correctly and so forth. But then it becomes a blockchain analysis. So can you prove that you actually did all of that? So there's many, many aspects of all of this. The timing is critical, and we're going to muddle our way through it, I think, as a society, and hopefully we come out in a better place at the other end. I will say that the World Bank, if you want to go search for it, has redone their analysis on critical minerals and what's needed for the energy transition. They published a report last year. They did one in 2017. They did another one in 2020. It's eye-opening if you haven't looked at it before. The amount of materials and metals that we need for the energy transition to achieve a 2-degree scenario. So they take the energy scenarios that are coming out of the UN panels, and they look at, to achieve that, we're going to use these different mixes of energy, and there's all these different subset technologies based on that, and they try to project how much we're going to need over the next 30 years and cumulative over the next 30 years. It's mind-boggling.
I would say that the new report in summary is more honest than the previous one. That's my personal take on that.
It is, except I thought it was interesting that in 2017, they said they were going to need 2.4 billion tons of steel. And in the new one, it went to 200 million. So where did that
come from?
$2 billion tons worth of steel go? Because, oh, by the way, if you have to include that in your carbon footprint, that changes things dramatically.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Let's see, there are a couple of quick questions here, and we're almost done, that I want to take because they're related to lithium recovery from oil and gas. Before retiring from the Bureau of Economic Geology at University of Texas, Austin, we started looking at that, and there is some work ongoing at BEG. So clearly, some of the folks in the group know about this or have already been looking at it. There was a question relative specifically to Arkansas. This has been a big topic, if off the radar, in Texas. The concentrations have to be good enough. It has to be commercially workable. And for those of you who know the oil and gas business, there are a variety of things that have to be resolved in terms of minerals ownership and disposition. But it's an intriguing idea. This also raises a question back to the hemispheric coordination that I wanted to mention. We have a series of roundtables that we will be holding. These will mainly be for our members of the Energy Forum at the Center for Energy Studies and people who support the Institute of Americas, but we'll be doing some public Baker Institute content as part of all of this. It will be a focus on South America, minerals and materials from a very particular geography of interest. We were going to open with Bolivia. That was actually on deck. We thought we might be able to do that as a lens on the new government and its desire to finally do something with its lithium resources. Bolivia is not ready yet for prime time, as it turns out. And that is a country that is a good example of countries that we need to watch closely, because the government's preferences on how things happen versus just the economic reality of capturing lithium from brines in Bolivia, sources of investment, the role of Chinese interests, all of those things are funneling down into that particular geography. It'll be a really good example as it unfolds of various issues out there that we've been discussing. For those who are interested in Baker Institute, content, and for that matter, Missouri Science and Technology, MS&T content. You can always look on our websites. We are rebuilding the Energy, Minerals, and Materials website for the Baker Institute. We'll be adding considerable amounts of content there. Mike, if people go over to the MST to O'Keefe, I'm assuming that they can find links. Well, I know they can find links to a lot of the published papers and other things that are going on. So you might want to add a comment about that.
Yeah, so, you can contact us through the website, or you can always look up my name and send me an email if you can't. I'll say that my teenage daughter tells me our university's website stinks. So, so anyway, so if you're having problems finding it, search S&T and Moats. I'm the only one on here on campus. So you can always send me an email. I'll be happy to oblige. And I see some comments about links and so forth. USGS commodity summary is an easy thing to search for and easy to find in Google. Yeah, there's a lot of other questions about lithium. I personally, lithium is on the critical mineral supply list. I'd be honest with you, my analysis at 1,000 level and talking to the subject matter expert at USGS, I'm not terribly worried about lithium. I think there's plenty of resources in the world and in the US. It'll become a chicken and egg thing. To me, it's a matter of bringing it on at the rate you need it. And
I think, to step in again, I think for the group, I think it goes to a bit of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Mike and I were part of a workshop for the Atlantic Council. And it's also been a subject that we've tackled in other roundtables at the Baker Institute, other things that we've done. The lithium-based battery designs are very alluring. They certainly have been easy to commercialize and expand. The problem is expanding the energy density of those battery designs. And so to the many questions that have been raised about the uncertainties associated with technologies themselves, and Mike, you came back to that a few minutes ago. This is the thing that makes it so difficult to look at what we're going to need into the future, because there are a lot of moving targets as people try to solve specific problems, and battery performance is a very specific problem. The chemistries that people have gravitated towards are ones that are doable, that enable that play on a combination of elements that provide specific properties and attributes, but they cannot perform the way that we need them to. And so battery chemistry, battery design, types of batteries, how many batteries, how many different kinds of batteries and battery chemistries we're actually going to need for different purposes. I mean, that in itself is an enormous question. And it goes to some other questions that everyone is raising about the performance of various alternative energy technologies. Considering, the complexities and energy intensity and emissions intensity of battery making, what do you need in cycle times, whether for electric vehicles, for grid-based storage, in order to get payoff, to ensure that the clean technology, meets all of the targets that everyone has. Those are enormous questions.
yeah.
As Mike said, we don't know at all, and it's going to be hard for anyone to know it all.
So I'm gonna switch this discussion just a little bit, because I think a lot of times what we're talking about is the energy transition that's coming, right? So it's coming in the future, and we don't know exactly what its shape and form. We're talking about ramping up production. The thing is if you've been in the mineral business, and several of the people who've commented, I know you're in the mineral business, and I know that we have been dependent on certain commodities for imports for my career, right? And so the question is, are some of these commodities now controlled by undesirable countries, and therefore we consider they are at a national risk and they need to be addressed now, regardless of what the future of the energy transition looks like? We are concerned that we cannot supply the things that we need for our military to provide a national security and to provide the societal needs that we've all grown accustomed to in the United States. And to me, I am more worried about domestic security risks when it comes to mineral supply now than I am worried about whatever happens in the market 10 years, 20 years from now. Because I don't think if I could really have predicted that, I'd be on a beach in Bahamas.
I think that's a good way to end this, and we do need to end. I want to thank Mike for joining me this morning for these two sessions. I want to thank everybody who participated for doing so, everyone who contributed to the Q&A and chat. Excellent stuff. I hope that Cecilia and others in the Baker Institute staff are capturing the chat and the Q&A because these include some action items for us, Mike, as we continue our collaboration and continue to think about these things. So stay tuned. We're doing our roundtables and webinars on roughly a quarterly schedule. We will be sending out notices to our Baker Institute distribution lists as different programs come together. As Mike said, this is a very dynamic space these days. And I think it's a consequence of dawning realizations about what we need, what the challenges are. To my point, the pre-existing challenges. One of the more interesting things to do is to look at some of the older reports on critical minerals. The Congressional Budget Office, 1983 at the time, was kind of considered to be a classic. And you can go back and look at that and see how little we've advanced, really, in terms of thinking through the challenges. The more things change, the more they stay the same in some instances. So we are going to be steadily picking away at this over the next few months. We need to pay close attention to our own backyard. So today, this roundtable and this webinar was our official opening of that, because clearly there's a lot to think about just on the domestic front. So thanks again, and look forward to hearing from everyone. And Mike, see you soon.
Thanks, Michelle. My pleasure.
All right. Everyone have a great day.